Hello, human geographers. We're going to talk about Chapter 3, get into some population geography, talk about some demographics, demographic transition, where different population exists, what comprises different population, and so forth. Okay, so population geography, we have essentially the study of spatial and ecological aspects. So we can study epidemiological considerations. For instance, disease. We can study health, age, mortality, a lot of things that have to do with the human population. It tends to be a very large aspect in study of geography. For instance, Western lifestyles adopting by a significant number of Earth's 7 billion inhabitants. We may soon deplete the Earth's life support systems, meaning there's a lot of people on Earth and we're consuming a lot of resources. So density, we have different studies for this. 19% of all humans reside in China, 17% in India, only 4.4% in the United States. So if you take Geography 105 with the DeBlige book, one of the areas when we get into talking about East Asia, we talk about China has the same amount of land area as the United States, although the land area in the United States tends to be more fertile or arable soils. About 13 million square miles. India has much less than that, so it kind of tells you how much more dense the population is in India and in China. Here's a map of population density throughout the world. Carrying capacity, we talk about meaningful index of population and density alone. Natality, total fertility rate. So what is the fertility rate in terms of reproductive lifetime per thousand? Here's a map of that. Talks about total fertility rate, death rate, rate per thousand. A lot of times that needs to, or there's strong interest in breaking that down by cause and where that occurs. Really big part of population geography, or the study of demography, if you will. So here we have demography, demographic transition. So there's different phases of this. There's different things that can go on. Agrarian societies depend on family labor, limited access to healthcare, death rates. Industrial era birth rates do not fall as quickly. So you have samples like this that happen through every country. The first country that essentially had the demise where we went to stage 4 and to stage 5, where the population can sustain itself, was the country Japan. So that's essentially demographic transition. Eurocentric reflects experiences of Western Europe, lockstep, stage-by-stage progression, influences by government policy, wars. So we see a lot of different things that happen. For instance, China's had basically gender-based policies that have influenced their demographics and also limited families down to one person. So policies like that throughout the world influence things also. And we also see age distributions, which in the Geography 105 class, predecessor to this 106 class, we deal with population pyramids quite a bit to break that down. So here's a map that talks about percentage of population that's 65 years or older, 15 years of age or younger. Here's the population pyramids I was referring to. You can find out what's going on in a region very quickly by looking at those. Tend to show different trends through different years in population, like we're seeing here. Sex ratio, comparison of genders, gender roles. What do different genders do in societies? And then we have infant mortality rate, and then quality of life is HDI, which deals with all the things that matter, how good the quality of life exists, from anywhere from education to healthcare to GDP, gross domestic product, or gross domestic income, all those kind of things. By the way, HDI helps the world and World Health Organization do a lot of relief efforts, especially in Africa. Infant mortality rate, so how many people are born per thousand. I'm going to jump into mobility, reasons for migration. A lot of this tends to be agricultural, livelihood, economics based. Decision to move, refugees fleeing from persecution in their country. We're seeing a pretty horrific case right now in Venezuela. I think the inflation this year alone is 1.3 million%, and 90% of the population is starving, whereas you go back, I don't know, 5 years ago, it was a fraction of that. And essentially they're locking down the borders. So different types of aspects in terms of migration flows. In the 105 class, we talked about the 3 primary migration flows, which tend to be from East Asia or Asia to Europe, and then Asia to the United States, and then or Middle America, including South America to the United States or to North America. Okay. Disease on the move, we definitely want to pay attention to spreading. Spatial responses to disease. Mapping disease. So this is a classic example of where there's a cholera outbreak in London by John Snow. He essentially used what's called a geographic information system to map where the utility lines were and where the individual locations where the disease impacted people. Essentially, he was able to find in the water system where it flowed, since water and sewer systems always rely on gravity. So essentially, where the contamination was introduced into the water system, it was able to be determined where that happened because it was the highest part of the water system of where the water flowed to the people in London. Population explosion. So we see a massive growth worldwide between 1650 and 1900. As we know, it continues today, like we talked about on the earlier slides, 7 billion people. Here's a map of that. Malthusian theory. Population essentially could exceed food production. That's what the Thomas Malthus theory. So overpopulation or maldistribution. World's wealth basically being more than population. Critics basically didn't believe that. And there's the rule of 72. Doubling time of population can be used by calculating the rule of 72. So basically take a country's rate of natural increase, or RNI, as a percent, and then divide it by the number 72 equals the number of years of population. It's growing at a given rate. It takes the double. Okay, control problems. China's one child policy, which I referred to before. Environmental influences, climate, disasters, natural disasters, human-made disasters, so forth. Adaptive strategies, as far as different climates and different kinds of controls and amenities that can help with that thing, either from help with the population, influences by the environment, people modifying their habits as an adaptive strategy, diverse settlement types as far as farm villages, landscapes and demographic change, depopulation. We've had places where population has reduced itself. Perfect example right here is Rome. At one point it was 1 million people. By 550 CE, it shrunk down to 20,000 people. A lot of that had to do with all the conflicts. Here we have examples of housing, basically people reacting to environments, shanty towns, basically building dwelling units as a sign of the time. hope you enjoyed this chapter. It's pretty interesting, and look forward to seeing you in the next chapter.